Americans are celebrating their country's past and present today on Independence Day, while Canadians are expressing concerns about what the future could hold for the Canada-U.S. relationship. U.S. Ambassador to Canada Pete Hoekstra says he's positive both countries will come out of trade negotiations with a stronger relationship.
I think we will get past this, and we'll get past it very, very quickly. I think we will come up with a trade agreement that people will look at it and say, wow, this is pretty good, and this is going to make the relationship stronger. And more importantly, I think they'll think this is going to help the economy of America. This will help the economy of Canada. It will help the citizens of both countries.
Well, that gives us lots to talk about with our panel of party insiders. Greg McEachran is a former Liberal ministerial advisor. Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. And Melanie Richer is a former communications director of the NDP. Hey, folks, so glad you're all here, including my twinning friend here, Greg McEachran. That means I'm going to start with you, Greg. I wonder if you share the ambassador's optimism.
I first wanted to say it was like looking in a mirror, but that'd be so unfair to you. And I know the gentleman in your life, and I think he'd be mad at me for saying that. So I apologize. I don't really agree with the ambassador, and I think since this ambassador has been here, he's a former politician, he's a previous ambassador, and I've actually been a little surprised by how quickly he's kind of stepped into messes of his own making, where he has said, he said, oh, the 51st state thing is in the past. And when you work for Donald Trump, one of the things, you have to really think about and kind of keep as your guardrails is never say never. And the president caught him out on that very early on. And so I found myself, today listening to some of the CBC Radio's coverage. There was a U.S. flag racing at Ottawa City Hall here today, which has not gone unnoticed. There's a lot of controversy around that. But listening to some of the things he said, those of us who will watch this really closely, I'm not sure how much I am buying that this ambassador, is he speaking on behalf of the State Department? Is he speaking this time on behalf of his president? It's not clear. And this is our second time with Donald Trump, and he had an ambassador that was here before. She wasn't here actually a lot. That came out when she had her Senate confirmation for her UN position. She was actually out of the country quite a bit, but she was very easy to deal with. We were able to reach her through, tariffs around Kentucky, where, her home state. But this is seems to be a very different political animal.
Melanie, I wonder, there's an interesting question here around expectation management, because it's not just Ambassador Hoekstra, but in fact, Canadian officials too saying, there's real reason for optimism here, but at the same time saying, maybe we're not going to reach a deal. And I just wonder what you think about what messaging should be going out to Canadians in a moment that seems precarious, but of course we don't really know.
Right, totally. And in a moment where, whatever you do say could just spark backlash from the president at any moment. So it is a tricky line to walk. I think folks are just hoping to hear from their prime minister and from Canadian officials that they're on it and that they're doing everything they can and that they have Canadians back. I think what we saw last week with, the expectation game of we're getting close, and then of course the president saying that we were walking away, was just another reminder that we're dealing with, to be fair to the prime minister, is a reminder that we're dealing with somebody who is it's a word that I could use that's maybe a little
mercurial.
Friendlier.
I don't know.
Thank you. Mercurial is a good diplomatic word. So that I think folks or Canadians are giving or have a little bit of patience with the Prime Minister, but it is an expectations game. And the more that you promise that things are going to go well and that things are going to go well quickly, I think a lot of folks were expecting something out of the G7 and nothing came, and we're still having these talks and we don't really know how well they're going. I think the less patient people will be. I hear you on not totally believing the ambassador at what he's saying, but I'm hopeful that, what he is saying comes to fruition and not just comes to fruition, but is good for Canadians. So hopefully that means we're getting closer. But yeah, the more you're setting expectations, the more you're letting people get disappointed if you're not delivering on them.
Yeah. Fred, Mel says nothing came of the G7, and I guess the caveat there, nothing concrete came, but there was this deadline, right? Which does, I don't know, does that focus the the mind with what the Prime Minister said? Does it create more expectations? Does it narrow expectations? Like, talk to me a bit about this political moment.
It certainly creates big expectations. We expect to see a deal done.
Yeah.
At some level, we're talking about a tariff fight here. It doesn't mean the whole renegotiation of CUSMA. That is a whole other kettle of fish that may take some time to get to. But there's something happening right now, and there is going to be the expectation that something is done. And if it's not, then...
Well, and let me ask you about that. I mean, what we keep hearing, particularly from the Prime Minister, is, listen, if it's not a good deal for Canadians, we're not going to take it. But, like, it is interesting to sort of go through the thought exercise of what would happen on July 21st if there isn't a deal, and how you negotiate that politically. Mel made the point that Canadians appreciate that this is sort of a rocky moment. But do you think Mark Carney can really turn around on the 21st and say, like, it just doesn't look like we're going to be able to make this work?
I think he can politically. I think he's got that. Expectations or that support from Canadians, understanding who he's negotiating with. Donald Trump is a known entity. He's not some new foreign leader that we're unfamiliar with, that maybe the Prime Minister just can't get the job done. I think the reality is we're dealing with a president who is incredibly abnormal and not something we're used to. So no, I think Prime Minister Carney has a lot of rope here. He has a lot of leeway that he'll be given, and he has an opportunity to do something with it, and that's what we'll have to see what happens.
And so, Greg, where do you think the move on the digital services tax, rescinding it, which has opened the door to conversations about what's next? You hear folks talking about the prospect of supply management. Is that on the table as well? We've had some very passionate discussions about that on the show this week. What do you think that the move on the DST has done to the perception around where this is going?
There's... if you're not a fan of the Liberals, if you're not a fan of Mark Carney, you see people saying things like, I guess it's elbows down. To me, elbows up is not getting an elbow in the face. It is telling somebody or showing somebody that you come in here, we're ready for you. We are prepared to take another step. But on this one, what was really interesting or really puzzling, I guess, is that the president said last Friday afternoon that it seemed like a new thing to him. And, the Liberals promised it in 2019. It was in the fall economic statement. I mean, originally, as I understand it, we were supposed to work with other countries on their DST, and Canada got impatient, probably needed the money and needed some wins and went on their own. I think part of the challenge, if I'm going to be really frank, is I don't remember Prime Minister Carney talking a lot about this. It's not and I'm not even sure as a Liberal, this was something that we talked a lot and put in our window. And I worked for a streaming company. I don't work for them now, so we were kind of adjacent to this issue. But I remember some business leaders last summer talking about the potential of this happening. So it's one of those cases where what problem was this solving? I'm not sure a lot of people really understood that. So I think the reaction has not been that heated because a lot of people really didn't understand what was going on with this and what the problem was supposed to solve.
Interestingly, one place it has provoked reaction, Mel, we had Lloyd Axworthy, former Foreign Affairs Minister, well known, a prominent Liberal, yes, from a few years back, let's say, but talking about the idea that Carney is bootlicking and that other world leaders are too. I wonder, can opposition parties talk like that right now, or is Mr. Axworthy in a particular position that gives him freedom to make these kinds of critiques?
I think it depends which opposition party. I think the NDP maybe has a little bit of room to talk like this and to really be the party that's standing up for folks who are being forgotten in this time where we've seen the Liberals totally move to the center. I think it's a little bit harder for the Conservatives to do the same thing.
Do you see that happening right now?
I am hopeful that they're going to take the space and do it. I know that they're having a lot of conversations about what that looks like. I think, now more than ever, we're seeing the Prime Minister make some announcements that, are really helpful for economy, helpful for businesses, but aren't necessarily focused on regular folks or on, working families. So I think that there's a massive opportunity there for the NDP to step into that. As it relates to, whether or not folks are talking about it, I'm maybe talking to different folks who did pay attention a little bit. And of course, in the bubble, when we're paying attention to this, we always knew that the DST was a bargaining chip. It was always talked about this way. It was talked about something that they were holding on to, that they could always put on the table or remove from the table to get a better deal for Canada. But for folks who don't, follow those conversations as closely, I think it was seen as, oh, well, you're doing what he wants you to do, and it feels like we're always doing what he wants us to do.
And it is worth noting that, you know, whether people are passionate about this or not, it's $2 billion worth of revenue.
Totally.
So there's an impact here that isn't just sort of political, esoteric sense of fairness.
Totally. And I think, you know, I think I said this last week, but folks in my universe who vote orange, folks in my universe who vote blue don't think that it makes a whole lot of sense that people like, you know, Jeff Bezos aren't paying their fair share of tax here. So I think that is also an issue that across the board, partisanship-wise, folks are paying attention to, whether they understand that it's linked to the DST or not.
Fred, from the Conservative perspective, like how much room is there to maneuver right now? Groundswell of patriotism, frustration at things that Donald Trump is saying, but the DST sort of creating perhaps a different space.
Well, just on the DST, for full disclosure, I have a number of clients who are opposed to it, or were opposed to it, I guess, as it's no longer a thing, it will not be soon. On the Conservative front, they've been actually very quiet on the DST from the beginning to the end. It wasn't something they ever came out with. So politically, it puts them in a funny spot. They can't applaud or criticize the government so much right now that they did this. But at the end of the day, DST was a bad idea. It was a bad go at your own idea that a dying Liberal government brought in when there should be a international and is an international discussion on how to handle these types of matters. And that's where it should be done so that there's a more uniform process on it.
But do they have to do the Conservatives have to kind of mind their P's and Q's till the 21st and then decide?
They absolutely should. And that's the thing about, like we talked about the DST, Finance Minister Champagne came out and said, we're bringing it in about a week before the deadline, said we're bringing it in. And then Trump came out and made his comments. We don't know at all what's going on behind the scenes and what type of negotiation is going on, and we shouldn't. And that's a good thing that the two governments are sitting down and hammering this out. And I'm sure there's lots of discussion on other issues, and this one included. And we don't know where it broke and what got to Trump to actually stand up that day. So politically, no, the Conservatives, the NDP, everyone, I think all the opposition parties should be sitting back right now, particularly when we have a 30-day deadline. It's not like it's a 3-year deadline, it's 30 days. We can wait, see what comes of this, and then assess.
Okay, we are going to switch gears now and talk about one of those opposition parties because it's been over 2 months since Pierre Poilievre lost his seat, leaving the Conservatives to challenge Prime Minister Carney in Parliament without their leader. But a path has officially opened up for the Conservative leader to have his House of Commons homecoming. Poilievre will make a play for a seat in the Alberta riding of Battle River Crowfoot. This is thanks to Conservative MP Damien Currick, who resigned from that seat to make way for Poilievre to run. This week, the Prime Minister called a by-election for Monday, August 18th, putting Poilievre on track to return to the House in September. Why don't we start with you, Fred, because this is about the Conservatives. Is there any, listen, one of the most conservative seats in the country, I think the discussion has become how much it is actually about the number, right? If he can he achieve the levels that Damien Currick did, and does it matter? If Pierre Poilievre wins not with 83%, but with 72%, does that send a bad message to Conservatives?
So traditionally, I'm a big believer in by-elections and what numbers we get out of them and what they may mean. I don't think in this case it quite applies, because I think it's going to be what does Poilievre look like when he gets back into the House. I think that's what's going to be important to see. So I don't think the number.
Why?
Because if he gets 72 or 92, we may talk about it on the show for a day or two, but then
I'm sure we will.
It's going to be about who is he when this House comes back. He was the perfect leader for the Conservative Party for the last 2 years when Justin Trudeau was the Prime Minister. Justin Trudeau is no longer Prime Minister. Is he still the right leader at the right time for the Conservative Party? Can he adapt his message knowing that Mark Carney is, he calls himself a Liberal, but he's governing as a progressive Conservative? How does Poilievre match that? How does he deal with that? Maybe Carney will drift back to the left like Trudeau did. Maybe he will try to shore up that NDP support that he currently has under him. But that's where I think it's going to be interesting. That's what's going to make or break Poilievre, is how he deals with that in the House. So the by-election itself, he's going to win. I don't know if the number is going to say or mean anything. It's going to be how he deals with the House when he comes back.
Mel, I wonder if you agree with Fred's argument, because I'm going to boldly predict, it's dangerous to make predictions in politics, but there are going to be a lot of pieces written between now and August 18th that talk about secessionist supporters in Alberta trying to put pressure on Poilievre to weigh in on these issues, and what does it say about how he's going to govern the country? Do you accept that actually it's not really that big a deal for Pierre Poilievre?
I would say maybe yes and no. The no, I don't know that it matters. I remember, my life was was not fun in the lead up to Jagmeet running in a by-election, and there was 9 MPs. CBC, I think, broke the story at the time that there was 9 MPs saying he needed to resign if he wasn't going to win, and he won, and everything went away, and things were okay for a little bit. The reason that I think, yes, it does matter what the support looks like is I think it matters to membership. I think it may matter as it relates to the confidence vote or the leadership vote
in January.
in January. I think that will maybe signal something for folks who are showing up at the leadership. But as it relates to regular folks, I mostly agree with Fred that people will see that he won and he's back in the House, or what he does with that. And right now, it's hard for the Conservatives to say, Liberals are doing bad this way. It feels like, the Conservatives are the one who supported them with the passing of Bill C-5 before the House rose, which is not something that we would have seen in the last 2 years. Right. So what his opposition looks like when he's back in the House in September, I think folks will see, is he still effective, or is he not up for the job? I think that will matter a lot to regular Canadians who maybe aren't partisan.
Greg, in terms of raw politics, though, should the opposition parties be trying to take a little chip off Pierre Poilievre in this by-election? Is that a good place for parties to use their energy, or is it about the big picture?
Well, I mean, does the Liberal Party really have the energy to expend in that riding?
Yep.
By the looks of the vote counts.
You got 12% last time.
Yeah. So I'm not sure that's the smartest move. And then again, like if a lemming is heading towards the cliff, why get in their way?
Is Pierre Poilievre the lemming in this metaphor?
But I'm starting to wonder, the longer that he's out of politics, the less he looks. I use the comparison to a deflated balloon. A couple of weeks ago, I'm told by some Conservative friends, his former riding, Carleton, had their annual general meeting, and 300 people showed up. But one of those people was not their former member of Parliament. He didn't show. And it's things like that. That's the death by 1,000 cuts. If you've taken abuse from him or his people, and you're an elected member, and the longer he's away and the less power he has over you, the more time you have to start looking around and see who else is there. And the fact that he picked this riding that is not really a microcosm of Canada, it's very particular. There's going to be an Alberta separatism issue around this. You're not building your base. Why didn't he ask Cheryl Gallant to step aside? Just down the road here, safe riding. She's held it for a long time. He could have kept in touch. When he came here, he was Pierre Poilievre, and then he changed the pronunciation of his name. I used to get a lot of heat from people. That's how I learned to pronounce his name. And I remember CBC during the election was showing, when he first started, that's how it's pronounced. Is he going to go back to that? I mean, there are going to be a lot of issues that come up because of this riding, and I don't think there are issues that actually help the Conservatives trying to grow.
We've got less than a minute. Fred, was the riding the right choice or not?
It's interesting. I've known Pierre for decades, and I know he doesn't like to take risks. He wants a sure thing, and he chose a sure thing. This is not going to be, there's no room here for any, there will not be any scenario where he does not win this seat in his back. And I think ultimately that is what his focus is on. But to Greg's point, this was a guy who built a movement within the Conservative Party that was built on being a strong leader and winner.
Yes.
He just lost, and it's hard to look like a winner when you've lost. So he's going to have to figure that out, and he's going to have to come back somehow in the fall with some kind of message that resonates, not just with the Canadians, but he's got to zero in on Conservatives to get them fired up too.
And still seems authentic given everything that he was doing in the last 2 years. Yeah, listen, fascinating discussion. So great to talk with all three of you. Thank you to our panel of party insiders, Greg McEachran, Fred Delory, and Melanie Richer.